My name is Rolland Love. I'm presenting a Lewis and Clark monologue today at the Paola Library in Paola, Kansas. This is the most charming little city. This one is a young adult suspense novel called The Blue Hole, and it is based on a lot of the events that I had growing up in the Ozark Mountains, and it has gotten 5-star reviews from the Kansas City Star, from the gentleman who runs the museum for Burt Reynolds, and numerous other reviewers. This is a cookbook of Ozark recipes, and it has 21 short stories that I wrote that are seen from the eyes of a boy growing up in the Ozark Mountains back in the 40s and 50s. It has 140 recipes in it. It was a finalist for Best Book of the Year in the state of Missouri in 2007. It has remedies, it has superstitions, has a little bit of everything Ozark. This is one of my favorite books, not because I wrote it, but because it is a comedy. It is suspenseful, and it is based on a real-life event when myself and a business partner were kidnapped by a psychotic old man when we were driving cross-country in an RV. I wrote the novel after we escaped, and there has been a screenplay written for this novel, and hopefully it will become a movie someday. Toe tags and TNT, and as you can see, Bass Pro allowed me to put their logo on the front of this book. I was a reenactor with Lewis and Clark during the bicentennial, which was from 2004 until 200 years earlier in 1804. Do you know who Lewis and Clark was? Well, this is going to be great then, because when you leave here, you'll know everything about Lewis and Clark. I'm going to start out by asking if anyone here has eaten skunk. Now, I brought a skunk hide with me, and I brought some other hides with me, because these are animals that Lewis and Clark would have eaten when they were on the expedition, in addition to buffalo and deer and beaver. This is a beaver pelt. This beaver would weigh 50 pounds, and it was one of the most tasty meals that Lewis and Clark had. That hide is 50 years old. In fact, all of these hides are 50 years old. Now, John, are you still eating skunk, or have you quit?
No, I gave it up for
you quit.
I'm fasting nowadays.
Okay. You guys can sit on the floor if you want to. How are you?
That's okay. We'll take it out. Yep. That's okay.
That is a possum. They ate a lot of possums on the Lewis and Clark. And I'll introduce myself for everyone that came in. My name is Rolland Love, and I was a reenactor with Lewis and Clark during the bicentennial. And we're passing these hides around because these are some of the different animals that Lewis and Clark would have eaten during the bicentennial. And I started out by asking if anyone here had ever eaten skunk, and nobody had, except for John, who's the videographer. And that people in the old days especially did eat skunk, because all you had to do was remove the scent gland, and they were no different than any other animal. This is a bobcat hide. There were a lot of bobcats that they would have eaten some of it. This is a badger. Badgers are fairly good size and relatively mean. And there were lots of muskrats. Thank you. Lots of muskrats. And There were 40 men on the Lewis and Clark expedition, and to feed that many people every day, they would have to kill a buffalo and a deer or an elk and 3 deer, or my character that I played, Silas Goodrich, would have to catch 300 pounds of fish to feed 40 men. That's incredible, isn't it? Now, the Missouri River, 200 years ago, had lots of catfish that would weigh over 150 pounds. So if Silas caught 2 or 3 catfish each day, then he caught enough fish to feed the entire crew. And in many cases, if the hunters didn't get enough game for that day, then it was up to him to get the food to feed the men. What we're going to do is start with where Lewis and Clark expedition began, which was on the East Coast, and Thomas Jefferson is the one who got Congress to appropriate the money to send Lewis and Clark on this mission that went all the way to the Pacific Ocean and all the way back to St. Louis, where it started in 1804. Now, the year before, Lewis, who was Jefferson's secretary, prepared for the mission by having a 55-foot keelboat made, and he got all the provisions that they would have and they would need for this expedition. They would make 10 to 12 miles a day up the Missouri River with a current of 5 or 6 miles facing them, pulling or paddling or poling this big 55-foot keelboat. So that's why they ate so much, they burned up so many calories. They would eat 6 to 8 pounds of meat every day. That's why the hunters, or Silas, had to supply so much meat. So before they left St. Louis in 1804, the keelboat was built in Pittsburgh, and then they floated it down the Ohio River to the Mississippi, and then up to St. Louis, and they camped there the first year in 1803. When they took off in the spring of 1804, they made it to Mandan, North Dakota the first year. That was 750 miles, and it was a grueling year. And they spent the first winter in North Dakota, and it got down to 45 degrees below zero. And in this entire trip, they only lost one person. And that was Sergeant Floyd, and he died of an appendix, burst appendix in Iowa. They faced danger every day that they were on the trail for 8,000 miles. And you would think there would have been more fatalities than one man, and it's just one of many things that nobody could believe that they were that fortunate. And once they got to the Pacific Ocean, that's where they spent the second winter in Oregon, and they were there for about 3.5 months, and it rained every day of the 3.5 months that they were there, except 4. And their clothes literally rotted off of them, and they were infested by fleas, because the fleas would move in to feed on the men and get out of the rain. So they were so miserable and wanted out of there so bad that they actually left earlier than they should have, so they got caught in the snow in the mountains going over, and they wound up eating half of their horses. So everything that happened, they would be near starvation, and something would happen that the Native Americans would give them food. It was like these endless strokes of luck that kept them going. Now, when they got to Mandan, North Dakota, and spent the winter, they hired a Frenchman by the name of Charbonneau who was going to be their interpreter, and he was going to be their guide. Problem was, he really didn't know much, but his wife, a 16-year-old Shoshone named Sacagawea, was a great interpreter. She knew 3 or 4 languages. She knew a lot about the land, and she had been kidnapped when she was 11 years old from the Shoshone, and she wanted to go home. And she saw Lewis and Clark as a great way to get back to her homeland, so she guided them from Mandan, and she also had a baby along the way, which she carried for a year in this cradle, or wasn't like it. And so Sacagawea, once again, a woman saved the lives of a bunch of men. So it's just the same old thing over and over. The women are the most important. I'm going to pass this picture around. Nobody really had a picture, but that was what they thought Sacagawea would have looked like, because she was young, pretty, and she would have had her baby with her. Pierre Baptiste was the baby's name. On the back of that picture is an interesting picture also, which is of York, who was Captain Clark's slave, and York was a great hunter. He along with Sacagawea, probably did more to save Lewis and Clark and the expedition than anybody else, any member of the Corps. When she got back to, when she guided them up the river from Mandan, and they got back to the Shoshone Nation, their encampment was at the foothills of the Rockies, called the Bitterroot Mountains. And Lewis and Clark were going to have horses to get over the mountains. They had no idea how big the mountains were. Someone had told them that there was these little mountains and they would be over them in probably a week. Just like someone told them that on the Missouri River